We've just finished exploring price elasticity of demand, which was essentially a sensitivity and quantity demanded due to a change in the price level of the product. There are two other types of elasticities that we sometimes concern ourselves with, and the first is called income elasticity of demand. Okay, so income elasticity of demand. Okay, and income elasticity of demand is usually represented by E sub I equals the percentage change in QX divided by the percentage change in I, where I is income. Okay, so this is essentially asking us, okay, if I change incomes by some percentage, how much does the demand for the product change? Now, recognize here, I didn't say how much does the quantity demanded of the product change, because we're not talking about movement along the curve anymore. Remember, you can only get movement along the demand curve by changing the price of the product. You change anything else that influences the desirability of the good, you're going to be shifting the curve. So we're not talking about movement from one point to another. What we are talking about is if I change the demand, if I change people's income levels, how much does the demand for the product change? Okay, relative to that change in the income level. Okay, so what we're talking about here is if we change people's incomes by some percent, how much in percentage terms does the demand curve shift? Okay, now we're usually concerned about how this relates to zero. Remember, in price elasticity of demand, our concern was really around that number one. If price elasticity of demand equaled 1, it was unelastic, but if it was below that, demand was inelastic. If it was above that, demand was elastic. Well, this sort of pivotal reference point is an income elasticity value equal to 0. Okay, if this value is greater than 0, then that means if I increase incomes, I increase demand. And if I decrease incomes, I decrease demand. That's what would give me a value of greater than 0. Now, remember, this tells us we have a positive relationship between changes in income and changes in demand for the product. This is the definition of a normal good, if you remember from way back when. Okay, now if this is less than 0, that means I increase incomes, demand for the product falls. If I decrease incomes, demand for the product rises. That negative relationship between changes in income and changes in demand is an inferior good. That would be by definition. Okay, uh, so the interesting thing here is if you can figure out how the demand for your product changes, or better yet, if you can get a hold of the income elasticity value for your product, you can immediately tell, is it a normal or inferior good. Now, if this value equals 0, that means I can change my income level all I want. I am not going to change the demand for that product. We can think of, for instance, like insulin. Okay, so diabetics, insulin-dependent diabetics, their demand for their product is going to be the same, regardless of their income level, because you can only take so much of it. So if I was an insulin-dependent diabetic, and I become a millionaire overnight by winning the lottery, I'm not going to buy any more or less insulin than I normally would have at any price level. Okay, so that's simply a good whereby there's no relationship between changes in my income level and changes in the demand for the product. The second type of elasticity that we will explore is something called cross-price elasticity of demand. Now, what this is, how this is represented, is typically by E sub xy. Remember, price elasticity of demand was just E sub x. Now I'm including another product y in here, and that would be represented as changing the demand for good X relative to a change in the price of some other good. Okay, now you can see where this is going. We remember when we explored changes in the price of related goods beforehand, we had complements and substitutes. Well, if we had, remember, a complement was characterized by, if I increase the price of a good, the demand for its complement would fall. It was a negative relationship there, and of course, so for instance, if I increase the price of hamburger meat, demand for ketchup would fall. If I decrease the price of hamburger meat, demand for ketchup would rise. Okay, so if this is less than 0, then you know we have complementary goods. Okay. Okay. Now, if this is greater than 0, remember when we had substitutes, we could say that okay, if the price of butter rose, the demand for margarine would rise, and if the price of butter fell, the demand for margarine would fall. Okay, and that's a positive relationship between the two goods. So if I increase the price of butter, demand for margarine would rise. If I decrease the price of butter, demand for margarine would fall. So if the cross price elasticity of demand value is greater than 0, we would have substitutes. Okay. Now, if this equals 0, it simply means there's no relationship between the two goods. Okay, there's no relationship between two goods. You can change the price of good Y all you want. The demand for good X does not change. So, double the price of bananas. What happens to the demand for Alaskan cruises? Okay, vacation to Alaska on a cruise ship. If you double the price of bananas, what would happen to the demand for Alaskan cruises? Well, there's no relationship there. So that value then would be 0 given the